it. And this is, it came up in the chat. So if you can see it in the chat, it's there. But I'm going to repeat it again.
Guys, this meeting is now recording. We can just stay here. In my it's recording. Does anyone else see that?
Hold on.
I see that too. Hi, this is Dan. I just joined in. Now it's recorded.
Okay, so everyone disregard that message. Don't leave this meeting.
Yes. Is that Rick? Is that Rick up?
Hello, Dan Lowry.
Rick, I think it was your magic. You joined in, all of a sudden the camera started to roll.
I have that effect. Technology fears me.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, James, for typing. Please disregard the code. Okay, hello, everyone. This is Karen, and I'm president of ISCR. And we got off to a little rocky start, but it looks like we're on track now. We're joined by Dan Lavery with Lulu Foundation, several of our board members, and also several of you that I'm just happy to see the numbers going up and people participating. But I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Valentine so he can get this started for us since we're running a little late.
Thank you so much. Just want to confirm you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, we can, James. And just let me jump in. Let me just give 2 seconds just to introduce James. James is a...
That's what I was about to say, Dan. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. No, go ahead,
okay.
Dan.
We're trying to be efficient. No, it's a real pleasure for us to be able to work with James. James started off his career working at the FDA and then actually got a law degree and is now working with one of the most highly regarded law firms dealing with regulatory and drug approval law, Hyman Phelps and McNamara, based in Washington, D.C. James also has been involved with virtually every patient-focused drug development meeting, both internal and external, since they've existed. And we're just very fortunate to have him as our consultant to help drive the organization of the PFDD meeting that we have scheduled for November 1st. So with that, I'm going to give it over to James and say thanks, and we're so lucky to be working with him. Oh, and I would mention too, please, if folks can mute if they're not speaking, just to make sure we keep background noise to a minimum. But feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. Haven't helped with every PFDD meeting, but have helped with quite a few. So very excited to be working with these 2 organizations that are have been tirelessly kind of collaborating to bring this patient-focused drug development meeting to your community. So my name is James Valentine, as Dan mentioned, and in addition to being your host for tonight, you will be seeing me again at the PFDD meeting on November 1st, where I'll be serving as the meeting moderator. So looking forward to not only being with you tonight, but getting to meet many of you in person on November 1st. So this webinar is designed to be an introduction for all of you who may not be familiar with the Food and Drug Administration, this patient-focused drug development initiative that it created, which was really a way to help bring your voices as individuals living with CDKL5 and the individuals that are providing caregivers of patients to the regulatory process and to drug development. So we want to kind of make sure that all of you that know you're going to be attending the meeting, or maybe are even thinking about attending the meeting, have this background information to help inform your potential participation. So to start out with a little bit of background, you may be wondering, what is the purpose of this PFDD meeting? I'm going to give you a little bit of this background up front, and then we're going to start diving deeper into some more of the educational content that we're going to talk about tonight. So the purpose of this patient-focused drug development meeting is to educate the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and other stakeholders about what it is like to live with CDD, your concerns about the disease as it progresses, how you're currently managing the disease, not only through the medical system, but even outside of it, and what meaningful treatments would look like to you. So it's really an opportunity to help educate important stakeholders about your experiences with the disease and your preferences for treatment. You might be wondering, why should you participate? Well, this is an important opportunity for you to have your voices heard. There's, a few different things in the box to help sure FDA can hear from patients, and this is one, perhaps the most exciting opportunity. And so it's a really important chance for you all to have your voices heard, because the FDA is the organizational unit that approves treatments for your condition. And so it's really important that they know what is important to you. And, the knowledge that they'll gain from hearing from each of you is actually going to impact their decision-making about those treatments being developed and help lead to better treatments and potentially even faster approvals for CDD, because FDA will fully appreciate the urgency and need that exists. So why are we having this meeting now? Well, one is this is a relatively new opportunity for the patient's voice to be heard. Historically, the patient did not have a seat at the table as part of the drug development process. And it wasn't until a drug was approved sometime by FDA, perhaps studying things that weren't even that meaningful to patients, or when a clinical trial was failing, a drug company or FDA wanted input from patients to understand why that was. Maybe why wasn't a study able to recruit and keep patients in a study? Well, that paradigm has been shifting, and it is now the culture at FDA and very much so in industry that they want to hear your voices at the beginning and throughout that drug development process, which we'll talk about tonight. Stakeholder engagement is definitely a priority, and that's what led to the initiation of the patient-focused drug development program, to help FDA learn about the disease impact, both from patients and their caregivers. So taking a step back and looking at what we're going to really do to dig in and educate all of you about FDA and patient-focused drug development tonight, here's an overview of what we're going to be working through. So I'm going to start out by giving you some background about FDA and drug development. I expect that there's likely a wide range of experience of those of you on this webinar tonight, and those of you that might be listening to this recording, of having an understanding of how drugs are developed and where FDA is and is not involved in that process. So we want to make sure everyone is on a level playing field when it comes to that information. We'll build on that and talk about where patient-focused drug development fits in to drug development and FDA approvals, so you can really understand where your voice is going to make a big difference. And then we'll drill down even further and talk specifically about our November 1st meeting and talk about some logistics, the format of it, some tips for participating, so that way you really are prepared and know what to expect when you show up that day. So to dive into background on FDA and drug development, I'm going to talk to you about some different kind of stages or phases of how drugs are developed, kind of from beginning to end. And this is going to be important because you're going to be hearing about research that's going on in the field, from the patient advocacy groups in your space, from industry in your space, perhaps even from FDA, and not just at this PFDD meeting, but beyond that. And so it's important to understand where things really are and what are the goals of the different types of research that's being conducted. And so this all really starts with drug discovery. This is the beginning of the research and development, or R&D, as you've probably heard. This is where researchers are looking to even just discover new drugs. And this is, important in rare diseases like ours, where, we're learning about the disease process, and we're learning about different ways that we might be able to intervene and have an effect on the disease. And so researchers are looking to test a lot of different compounds, different drugs, biologics, maybe even cell and gene therapies, to see how they might potentially benefit, in this condition. And so they're screening these different drugs and looking at different approaches and technologies, and they're identifying a number of different compounds or approaches that might have a promising effect, given what we do know about, impacting the disease from basic science research. So once we've identified a product candidate, a drug that we're going to, work to see, test to see if it actually will help treat the disease, we start in preclinical development. And so preclinical is the term that we use for testing of drugs before they're being tested in humans. And so this is, the goals here are to primarily determine whether the product is safe. So we're doing tests, kind of what we would refer to as in a petri dish, some in vitro and in vivo testing, as well as animal studies, perhaps in healthy animals, or if we have models of the disease in an animal, whether that be a mouse model or something else. We're testing the drug to see if there's any safety issues that we need to be concerned about, and also, at what dose there's safety issues, because all drugs have inherent toxicity. It's a matter of figuring out what is a reasonably safe dose that we can use. And then, to the degree that we can test to see if the drug might have some effect in the disease process, we want to do that in the preclinical phase as well. And so all of this information in the preclinical phase is put together in what's called an investigational new drug application. And that is what is provided to FDA to help them understand how the drug works in these non-clinical or preclinical tests, and to propose moving testing of the drug into the clinic, into humans. And so FDA reviews that IND submission, and after looking at all of that pharmacology and toxicology studies, that's looking at how the drug is distributed in those animal studies. The toxicology is the safety. They look to make sure that the companies are manufacturing the drug in a way that is high quality. And then they're looking at the proposed clinical study, the clinical protocol that has been proposed. And that first study is typically a phase 1 clinical trial. And so the phase 1 study is typically the first study that's done in humans. The primary goal here is looking at the drug's safety. So sometimes phase 1 studies are done in healthy volunteers, so individuals without any particular disease or condition. But in rare diseases, typically drug development is a little bit more efficient, and actually initial studies can be in individuals with the disease or condition. Here in phase 1, we're primarily focused on safety, so we're looking to understand what are the most common side effects of a drug, and we're also looking to understand how the drug is metabolized and excreted in the body. So, is it getting to the target cells or tissues within the or organs within the body? How long does it stay there? How quickly, does the drug leave the body? All important information. At the conclusion of phase 1, we move into, as you could guess, phase 2 of clinical development. Once we've established that the drug is safe at particular doses, we kind of have understood the common side effects. Now we want to start scaling up in conducting larger studies that begin to now evaluate the drug's effectiveness, how well the drug works in treating the disease. And so, that means we're studying the drug in individuals with the disease or condition, or the patients, the patient population. And so, this is when we begin to start having different types of controlled studies. We're comparing the drug. We're not just putting the drug in humans and seeing what happens. We actually want to see how that drug effect compares to not receiving the drug. The most common type of control is a placebo control, it's a sugar pill. To see what benefit might be due to a placebo effect versus drug effect. Of course, we're continuing to monitor short-term side effects and other safety. These studies tend to be larger than the phase 1 studies. Phase 1 studies might be in a handful of patients. Phase 2 studies can be larger in the tens, perhaps in hundreds of patients, at least in rare diseases. 100-patient study would be pretty large in a rare disease like this. So we're looking to, establish what we call the proof of concept. Can we show some initial preliminary clinical data to show that the drug is having the effect that we think it has, such that we can actually invest in bigger, longer phase 3 studies. So phase 3 studies are the studies that are larger scale. They're traditionally, they're randomized, placebo-controlled. There's a lot of different novel clinical trial designs that are used in rare diseases, but the traditional one is that randomized placebo-controlled study. So, patients agree to participate. They're randomized either to a drug or placebo. They don't know which arm of the study they're in, so they're blinded, and that is considered the gold standard of a scientific experiment to understand whether or not the drug works. So the primary goal here is to establish the effectiveness of the drug, but that is done not only by looking at the magnitude of the treatment effect, so how much benefit is provided, but is that benefit, does that occur over a duration of time? Does it continue to grow, or is it pretty stable, or does it diminish over time? The study is big enough that we can actually look at different subpopulations within the broader patient population, everything from different age groups, different ethnicities. Perhaps there's some subtypes within the patient population you can look at. And this is also a chance that where you could, if you haven't already in phase 2, you can look at different doses of the drug to see if there's a dose effect, where you either increase or decrease the dose from what you've tested before, whether that has a kind of proportional response. And then this being the biggest, longest type of study, this is also a great opportunity to learn a lot more about safety of the drug, including over that longer period of time. You have more people, so you can maybe find more of those rare safety issues or adverse effects. And you also will be testing for drug-drug interactions. So how does that drug you're testing interact with drugs that are commonly taken in the general population, or drugs that are specifically taken in this patient population? Once you've conducted all of your clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3, you then want to see if you have enough information to put all of that into what is called a new drug application, that's for drugs, or a biologics license application, which is the name of the application for biologics like vaccines, proteins, cell and gene therapy. But they're essentially the same type of application. It's just a different name for the different product type. But this is the application that, if approved, allows the company to market the drug and manufacture the drug. And so you hold a pre-NDA meeting, so a meeting before you submit one, to help identify for FDA what you view as the pivotal study information. So, what information really establishes benefit and risk. Discuss and get some agreement with FDA on what analyses would be important from that data. And this is a good opportunity to uncover any major issues. And so if there's additional work that needs to be done, the company can learn that from FDA prior to submitting their application for FDA to review. Once that NDA or BLA is submitted, it includes everything, all of that preclinical information, all of that human data from clinical trials, all of the continued manufacturing information that's been collected from the manufacturing process. That is all provided to FDA for them to conduct their own independent review. So in that review, FDA wants to first make sure that it's complete. Once they've done that, they assign it to a review team that evaluates the application. FDA is first looking to see if there's effectiveness that's been demonstrated for the drug's proposed use. So, it's up to the company that's putting in the application to say, we've studied this drug and we've demonstrated that it works, in patients with a certain disease, and maybe it's only in some portion of patients with a certain disease, but it's up to the company to define what that is, what they're asking for the drug to be approved for. FDA looks to assess effectiveness. They look to assess the safety, because they have to, by law, determine that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks. So that's an important concept for us, because that's a critical point where the patient voice and patient preferences helps FDA in their decision making. And then, of course, we've talked about looking to see if the manufacturing methods and controls actually help make the product be high quality. They want to make sure that whatever product is coming off the manufacturing line actually contains what it's supposed to contain consistently, and it doesn't contain impurities that might be harmful to patients. As part of this review process, it might go to an advisory committee. This is an expert panel of outside of FDA that FDA convenes. There is a patient representative that serves on this panel. And they look and review a summary of all the information that was in the NDA and help answer some scientific questions for FDA. FDA's job and companies' jobs are not done once a drug is approved. Post-market is the term we use when a drug is on the market. It's been developed. And so safety surveillance continues. As you can imagine, clinical studies are relative to, especially in chronic diseases, lifelong diseases, clinical studies are pretty brief in duration, and they're a fairly small patient population. So a lot of new safety information emerges when the product is out on the market in a broader range of patients and a much larger number of patients. And so companies monitor safety, and that information goes to FDA as well, to continue to assess the ongoing benefit risk of the product. So we've talked a lot about the different phases of development. Most of that, as you've seen, the different clinical trials and non-clinical trials are actually done by companies or other types of researchers. Actually, in some cases, patient groups will do that type of research. And I've mentioned only a couple of the times that companies engage with FDA early on in that investigational new drug or IND application that allows them to go into humans. And then at the end of it, when they're submitting their new drug application. But we haven't really talked about what exactly is FDA's role throughout development. So just to mention a couple of things that FDA does not do. FDA is not in the business of developing drugs. That's the researchers, the pharma companies, as I mentioned, even nonprofit groups that are doing the research. FDA is not even doing any testing of the drugs in any trials. That is, again, the researchers and the companies and other groups. FDA isn't there while the studies are ongoing. They certainly have regulations that govern the conduct of clinical trials, but they're not the ones doing that. It's up to researchers and developers to come to FDA and get their approval before they start studies, however. Some other things just to kind of talk about the scope of what FDA does and does not do. It's important to know that FDA does not have authority to regulate the practice of medicine. So FDA, they're regulating the development, those clinical and non-clinical studies, and then the marketing of the medical product. So they regulate whether a company can market the drug, put it on the, sell it, advertise for it, etc. But doctors are free to prescribe that drug for other conditions. The doctors are not regulated by FDA, so they don't have to stick to what is in the approved labeling. So you've probably heard of off-label use. That's what this is referring to. So FDA does not regulate doctors and their practice of medicine. FDA also does not regulate the price of medicine. So when FDA is conducting its review, it does not have information about drug prices. Even if it did, it doesn't have the authority to base approval decisions based off of what that drug price might be. So that is just beyond FDA's mandate. That all being said, FDA does play an important role in helping facilitate drug development. FDA does have the mission to promote the public's health. And so FDA reviewers, you can imagine these people are seeing every clinical trial and, across a whole range of different diseases, as well as all the clinical trials in any one given disease. And so they have a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, a lot of lessons learned. And so they can provide technical help to those researchers and drug developers. There's actually many more interactions that occur than we talked about throughout development, where FDA and companies meet, and FDA helps them design clinical trials and studies. And this is a kind of an iterative process that happens throughout all of drug development. And a lot of that is due to, in part, to this law called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act that allows FDA to actually collect user fees from those NDAs, those marketing applications, to support all the work that it does. So I think we probably only scratched the surface of drug development and clinical trials, but there's a great resource on FDA's website. You go follow this link to fda.gov/for-patients. It's a nice interactive tool that walks in more detail through drug development and drug approval process. So now let's talk about where you all fit into this. And we're going to talk about it within the context of the patient-focused drug development initiative, since that's the meeting that we're preparing for. But much of this applies to other different programs that FDA has for engaging with patients. Just so you're aware that this is actually a very big area of engagement and a priority for FDA. So patient-focused drug development has been conducted through these patient-focused drug development meetings. FDA wanted a more systematic way to gather the patient perspective about their condition and about available treatment options. FDA recognized that this information about the condition and about treatments would help set the context for those benefit-risk decisions that I mentioned, where FDA has to determine whether the benefits of a drug outweigh its risks. And so, this is important, critical for helping them make that judgment call. They're the experts in looking at what are the benefits. They can sift through all the data and figure out what the benefits are. They can do the same with the risks, the safety information. But when it comes to deciding for patients whether a drug should be available to them, that fits into needing the context of the individual disease. Not certain diseases, given how severe they are, patients would be willing to tolerate more risk than perhaps other patient populations. So it's important for FDA to have this context during development and review of those applications. So just to show that a little bit graphically, FDA systematically looks at benefits and risks, and they recognize in the first two bullets you see here that they need the context of understanding the condition and understanding treatment options. Once they have an understanding of that, then they can look to the benefits of the drug, the risks of the drug, and how risks might be managed to help lower the risk of the drug. But those two first bullet points are absolutely are critical before doing the rest of the benefit risk analysis. So our PFDD meeting, this meeting is going to provide a framework for discussion of questions that actually came from that benefit risk framework. So these are those important considerations for decision making, where this meeting is designed to help answer those questions. So to help do this, we've reviewed FDA's questions as well as other questions from other meetings that have been done, other PFDD meetings, and we've made sure to tailor our agenda and different panel questions to make sure that we're going to communicate the information that is really important to this community. And I can't emphasize enough that the only way FDA is going to get this information is if there's active involvement from all of you that are on this webinar, that are listening to this webinar, not just to show up, but to be truly active participants in the meetings. So let's talk about participating in the meeting, since participation is so important. Let's talk about meeting logistics. So who's going to participate? Of course, patients and their caregivers are key stakeholder. If you don't show up, we can't have the meeting, because you're going to be the experts that are answering our questions. FDA staff are, of course, going to be there. They're very eager to hear from you and listen and learn, as are the pharma and biotech companies. FDA and industry will be there in listening mode. They're there to learn. You all are the experts for this meeting. When is the meeting? It's in the afternoon. It's a half-day meeting on November 1st. That's going to be held in at the College Park Marriott in Hyattsville, Maryland, which was selected very specifically to be near FDA's headquarters, which is in White Oak, Maryland, very close to this, to help ensure that we get a large FDA turnout, because we want as many of them to hear from you as possible. That will really increase the impact of the day. And how can you participate? Of course, you can be there in person. That'll allow you to, you'll be hearing more about this, but it'll allow you the chance to participate in the audience discussion that we have, but also participating on live via the live webcast. We're going to be having live polling questions for both people in person and online. So by participating online, you'll be able to contribute throughout the afternoon. To give you an idea of the agenda, we're going to be starting out with some welcome and introductory comments from our host organizations, as well as from the FDA. We're going to hear a little bit of background on the condition and clinical trials from a clinical expert, really to just the reason for this. While patients and caregivers are our key expert for the day, we know that not all FDA officials will have the same understanding of kind of the science of the disease. And so we want to make sure that they all have some of that background information before we jump into hearing from you all on the two key topics of understanding the disease symptoms that affect your child's life, and how you manage symptoms and current and future approaches to treatment. So those two topics, understanding the disease, understanding treatment approaches. So for each of our topics, we're going to have panels where we're going to be hearing from you, the community. Panelists, following those panels, we're going to be having a set of polling questions that will allow everybody both in person and online to participate and provide inputs. And then that's going to lead into a moderated discussion with the audience that's there in person. And we're going to do that for both of our two topics. And then once we've done that and we fully explored those issues, we're going to look to close the meeting, again, with some comments from FDA and from our patient group hosts. So I mentioned that we have these two topics on living with the disease and on treatments. I just want to give you a sense of, well, what are we really going to be asking of you and of the panels to provide inputs on? And so here we have our topic 1 discussion questions. And so here you see, we want to hear from you all about the symptoms that have the most significant impact on patients' lives. We want to hear how those symptoms are actually impacting life. We don't want just the list. We want to hear how are those limiting activities that are important. How we want to hear examples of those things, and we want to get a sense of how much that varies. On a best day versus a worst day. Is there a lot of day-to-day differences or week-to-week differences or beyond? And we want to know, how have these symptoms changed over time? Has the disease progressed? Are there periods where, it's worse than others? And is there anything that that triggers it being better or worse? So once we've explored and understand the condition, we want to then look to understanding how you all, the community, treat and manage the condition. And so we want to understand what those different treatment approaches are, and that can be anything from pharmaceutical approaches, that can be medical procedures, that can be non-traditional medical approaches. It can also be things that are done in daily life, diet, exercise, lifestyle modifications, things that you have to change in your daily life to accommodate the condition to help manage it. We want to know, once we know what those things are, we want to know how well those different things are working to actually manage and treat the symptoms of the disease. What are the downsides to those treatments? As we know with drugs, every drug has some type of safety issue. Sorry about that. Had a fire alarm go off. Didn't want to be blasted with that. So I will jump back in now. So for questions, we want to know what those downsides are, whether that be a safety issue or it could be something different, like the amount of time that it takes to care, or that certain care settings take a lot of time to travel to, or you have to spend a lot of time there. Anything that you really view as being, the negative trade-off for that particular drug or treatment approach. And then the final question that we have is we're looking towards the future, assuming that there's no complete cure for the condition. We want to know what specific things you would be looking for from an ideal treatment. So we want to know here, what would you prioritize, and what amount of benefit on whatever is important for you to get from a treatment, what amount of that would be the amount that you need for it to be meaningful. So if it's a particular symptom, do you need that symptom? Do you need that symptom to be stable? Not progress? Do you need that symptom to actually get better? And if so, how much better would actually improvement be needed for that to have an impact on a patient's life? So I mentioned this briefly, the discussion format for our two topics. Just to spend a little bit more time and get in detail on this, we're going to be starting with that panel of caregivers for each of the topics. The idea here is to set the foundation for the broader audience discussion that will follow. Panelists are going to be selected to make sure they reflect a range of experiences with the condition. They, of course, won't be able to represent all experiences with the condition, and that's why we're going to be using polling questions and the audience discussion to supplement that. We're going to have those polling questions for both in person and online to further, one, make sure we hear from everybody in the room on certain questions, and we want to make sure we have a sense of everybody's experiences, or we want to know everybody's preferences on. And this too will help us kind of as a starting off point for the discussion. By having a sense of the experiences we have in the room, we can then dive deeper and hear from people in the room and learn about their experiences. And you'll be able to do those polling questions right from your phone or tablet or laptop, or for those who are following along from home, you can do it on your home computer. We'll then move to a discussion with, excuse me for just one moment. We will then, after hearing those polling questions, move to a discussion with the audience. And the idea here is really to dig deep, understand the experiences that are shared with your community, both common experiences as well as those that are maybe unique that you have. And so I will be asking questions and inviting you to raise your hand to respond, and we'll have a nice dialogue there in the room, hearing from as many of you as we can on those different discussion questions. So one thing for those of you who are tuned in or watching this webinar, we're recruiting those panel members. So I really apologize for that.
Was that your smoke alarm?
Yes. It is.
Oh, no. Sorry.
Yeah, so sincere apologies. So we are looking to recruit our panel members. So our panel members will be working to prepare written statements in advance of the meeting that they'll be then speaking to at the meeting. And so if you are interested in being a panel member, we want you to know that we'll be working with you along the way to help you in your development of your statement. So that way it really captures what you want to say. These statements are limited in time just by the nature of them. And so we want to help you say as much of what is important to you in the amount of time that we have, and in a way that will really be able to be understood by FDA. And so, we'll be there along the way as you develop your statements. And really, these panels are invaluable to your to the meeting. They set the framework for the audience discussion. They're important because they're an opportunity for FDA really to hear a little bit more in depth than maybe otherwise could be shared with FDA about experiences and preferences. And so we're seeking applicants for individuals to be panel members. Our deadline for this is August 20th. If you are selected to be a panel member, just know that in addition to our support in developing your statement, we'll be looking to help you get there and be there. And so if you're interested, here is the link for the application to be a panelist. So I want to spend a couple of minutes, whether you're thinking about being a panelist or you're just thinking about attending as an audience member, or if you're not able to be there in person, even just participating via the web. We want this to be the most effective meeting as possible. And given that we have just one afternoon, to really help FDA understand what is really a complex condition, we have these tips that we think will really help, and from my experience have helped. So we spent time tonight talking about FDA's role and the purpose of this meeting in helping inform FDA decision-making. It's important to keep that in mind because there's a lot of aspects of your experiences that are important but may not be relevant to our audience of the FDA. So we want to make sure we're really staying on point in terms of having an impact and helping FDA understand the parts of your experience that can impact their decision making. We've provided you the discussion questions, and they'll be available also online. And so we want you to review those discussion questions in advance, and that gives you a chance to really think about what experiences, what examples you have to share that can help answer those questions. Those questions were designed when I was at FDA. We designed those to really help inform that benefit risk framework, and they've worked exquisitely well. So we think that those are really important to focus in on. We do ask if you have something important to share that you try to relate it to then one of those topics or one of those discussion questions. That will help with the flow of the meeting and help us to kind of tackle things in an orderly fashion. We know that there's a lot of common experiences as well as less common experiences. If you do hear someone say something that relates to you, it is important for FDA to know that there's others in the community that have experienced that. And so, please do feel free to reiterate those feelings or experiences, but always be thinking about how you can give your own, kind of personal perspective or unique perspective on that issue. Especially during the audience discussion, we ask that you keep your comments concise and focused. There's going to be many voices to be heard. This will be an emotional topic. So sometimes it's easy to, not be concise. but please try to be concise when you do speak. That way, we can hear as many of the voices in the room as possible, and that's really going to magnify the effect of this meeting. And everyone should know that regardless of how you're participating, or say you're on the webinar and or listening to this webinar, and you're just unfortunately not able to make that November 1st date, either in person or online, we're going to be collecting additional comments from everybody following the meeting, and all of those comments will still be included in the summary report that will go to FDA, regardless of whether you were there at the meeting or not, because that's another way for us to magnify the number of voices that we have. So if you are there in person, just know that if you weren't able to answer every question that you wanted to, you'll be able to supplement what you said in person via those comments, written comments. So again, there's two ways to participate: in person or by webcast at the meeting. In the report, all of the responses will be kept confidential, so it won't be associated with your name. But of course, this is a public meeting, so if whatever you say and is heard by these different stakeholders, it is open to FDA officials and the biopharmaceutical industry to come and hear and listen to you. Here's the link for registering for the meeting. Again, we're going to be collecting comments for 30 days after the meeting. To do that, we've set up an email box, and you can provide written statements. I'll recommend that you try to answer those discussion questions. That would be most helpful for us. And those will be included in that summary report, which is called the Voice of the Patient report. That'll actually be submitted to FDA. So finally, we have some travel information for you. So we're getting really into the logistics here. So there's a limited number of discounted rooms at the hotel that is on site where the meeting will be held. The rate here is $169, and you can make those reservations at this link here. There's also limited scholarship funds available to help individuals that have a need for assistance. So please reach out to us if that is needed, and we will work with you on that. And for those of you who have not made travel arrangements, here's just a couple of ways that if you're not familiar with the DC area, that you can get into town. So there's a couple close by airports, Reagan National and Baltimore Washington International airports. They're about equidistant from this hotel. You can also take the train into Washington, D.C., and then it's a short cab or Uber ride to the hotel. And then there will be a travel document that will be sent that has travel information as well for registrants. We are here for you if you have questions. Of course, we're going to be taking questions tonight, but if at any point you have additional questions or you need assistance, we have a website. This webinar will be recorded. Other information is available there. And then, of course, you can email the PFDD email that we have set up. So to summarize, this is your opportunity to be part of the drug development and approval process. It's such an honor to have these meetings, have this opportunity. The FDA officials are very busy. They're in lots of meetings. They have lots of information to review all the time. They're carving out an entire half of a day to be with just you, just thinking about you and learning from you. So very, very important opportunity. As I've talked about, where the patient voice is important, when they do learn from you, that's going to have a meaningful impact on how drugs are developed and how drugs are approved. And this is important not just for the approval, but really from the beginning. You'll have an impact to help make sure studies are designing things that are, or start studying things that are actually important to you all in your community. And then as they develop, really there's an understanding of these needs and an urgency to get these drugs to you. So you really have an opportunity to make a difference. So I will stop there, and I will turn it back over for fielding questions. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and the rest of our planning team probably can help too if you have more logistical questions.
Oh, I missed.
Thank you so much, James, for that explanation.
Yeah. So I'm looking through some of the questions that came in through the chat. So maybe we can start with that, and then you know, we'll please type in any other questions you might have, or we can take questions you know, over the audio or over the phone. So there was one question that said, not everyone in attending will be on a panel, but can everyone participate in the audience? It's a very important question, and that's yes. Whether you're, you know, if you are a patient or caregiver, we are here to learn from you, and everyone in the audience will be able to participate in that audience discussion just by raising your hand. Okay, so the question was, how many panels are there and how many people will be on each panel? So we're going to have 2 panels, one for each of our 2 topics. So one panel will be speaking to the symptoms and burdens of the condition, and the other panel will be speaking to treatment approaches. On each panel, I believe we have 5 or 6 individuals that we can recruit for. And so, you know, if you are interested, you don't have to specify which panel. In fact, we would want you to be open to serving on either panel, and we will be selecting individuals based off of, you know, trying to cover a range of experiences. And so when you apply, you will be collecting information that will be helping us determine, you know, if we have a range of experiences and who might fit better on each of the 2 panels. Other questions?
James, can you speak a little bit to the audience is going to be the most important factor in this. I mean, panel participation is important, but it's also important to attend and speak from the audience.
Yes.
And you just talked about that, but I mean, really, it's just as important to be there, whether you're webcasting or coming to see us.
That's right. The most amount of time at this meeting will be spent doing the audience discussion. We really want to have, you know, a range, you know, as many people there in person and online as possible. You know, some of the questions where we want to get a sense of, you know, how many, you know, different families are actually experiencing a particular symptom or a particular burden or have tried some particular treatment. You know, we're going to be using the polling technology to really show across everybody, you know, how many people have those different experiences. But that alone isn't going to be enough to help FDA understand, you know, what that really looks and feels like. And so that's where the audience comes into play. You know, we're going to be looking to you to share your experiences, to really pull back the curtain, to help FDA understand, you know, what this looks like, what this feels like, what this means in terms of how it impacts daily life. And the only way we can do that is if we have a range, you know, as many people with as broad of a range of experiences, you know, common and even common experiences, just to reiterate to FDA the magnitude of need that you all have for new treatments and what that need actually looks like. So we're going to be spending the most amount of time at this meeting talking with all of you in the audience. So we hope that you, all of you on this webinar or listening to it, you know, will consider coming. We totally understand that not everyone can be there in person. And, you know, we've designed a number of polling questions to really help engage with you on the web during the meeting. And, you know, we encourage as many people as possible to submit those written comments as follow-up. You know, certainly those of you on the web that don't have the benefit of the in-person audience discussion, we'd love for you to build on your answers to those polling questions with some more color in the form of written comments.
There are a couple of more questions. Go ahead, James. I was just going to make sure you saw those new questions in the chat box.
Okay, so there's a question about what to wear, and is there a dress code? The dress code is to be comfortable. You know, we don't want anyone there, you know, kind of wearing a suit and tie if that's not comfortable to you. You know, I would say, you know, we discourage in general, you know, graphic T-shirts or you know, things that, you know, might be distracting. But no, there is no need to dress up more, you know, and be uncomfortable. You know, so feel free to wear whatever is comfortable to you. You know, certainly.
So I think her question is more directed toward, I mean, she has specifically CDKL5 gear. So I think she's thinking like, should we do a color coordination or something like that? Maybe is what she's referring to. I'm not sure.
Right. So no, I don't think there's any need to wear particular, you know, CDKL5 shirts or anything like that. Certainly,
right.
To wear something like that, but no, there's no coordination that's going on for this. So there's a question about, do panelists read their statements or are they answering questions? So that's a great question. The panelists are reading their statements. So the panelists are going to be asked to prepare that 5-minute statement, and we're going to be working with you to help do that. There are no specific questions being asked to the panel. During the audience discussion, however, everyone, including the panelists, can chime in and help answer those questions. So there's a question about the range of experiences. I assume this is referring to the panels that we're looking for, you know, whether is that age, sex. So yes, it's a bit of everything. So we do want demographic diversity if that's possible. But we're also looking towards range of experiences with the condition. So different symptoms or severity of symptoms at different points in, you know, time frames from time of onset, different ranges for panel 2 on different treatment approaches that have been tried. So that's more important perhaps than the demographic diversity, but we'll do our best to balance both.
I will also mention, I know one of the comments was age, and one of our other goals is to make sure that, that young and old are both represented, because the experience that a parent has in the first 1 or 2 years of life is very different than the parent who has a 13, 14, 15, or even adult child affected by this disorder. So we want to make sure that we represent the entire population as best we can. I know we can't, like James said earlier, we won't be able to have representation for every experience, but we want to show the different levels of severity, and then the challenges change as your child grows and changes. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. That's great additional color there. There was a question about, and I think they asked this for the panelists, but I think this really applies for everyone in terms of how much to expect, how big to expect the audience to be. Can you speak to I don't know, remember the number off the top of my head, but what is the capacity of our in-person room?
Dan, I think it's 100. I mean, I think 100, 150.
Yep. So the main room was 100, particularly configured with chairs in the front and tables in the back to allow for easier movement of families and wheelchairs and mobility, etc. So about 100.
Yes. So that'll be 100, and that'll be mostly members of your own community, families. And then after that, there will also be FDA officials and industry in the room. But it will be all friendly. Everyone there is either there from your own community or there to really learn from you all. The audience members, the FDA and the industry, they will not be asking questions. The only person that will be asking you all questions will be me as the meeting moderator. Those questions are going to be based off of those discussion questions. I might have follow-up questions for the group, or as we're talking about things that I'm learning from you, everyone in the room is learning from you. That might also lead to some particular follow-up questions. But by and large, the questions will be limited, at least in scope, to those 2 slides with the different discussion questions. The panels, again, will not be asked the questions specifically. We'll be posing the questions to the whole room for the audience members, including panelists, to be able to answer and respond to. I'll be calling on people and moving throughout the room to try to hear from as many people as possible and work through those discussion questions. These are all very good questions.
Okay, so we had one person message that they couldn't hear anything, and so I'm hoping other people can hear. I'm hoping it was just him, but I actually was able to message him. I think Amanda thought he meant were any of the people asking questions talking, but he literally wasn't hearing anything. But he's going to drop off and rejoin. But Amanda, you can still hear, right?
I can hear, yeah. I think I can hear both of you talking, actually, when you do.
And I can hear everything too. And at the end of the meeting, after we're done recording, I'll process the Zoom file and make sure that the audio is working there too.
Perfect.
Okay. So he was going to drop off and rejoin and see if that helped. So anyway, I just wanted to double check.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions. We'll do a final call for questions from the group. Of course, please remember that we are here for you. If you're interested in being a panelist, please do apply. Please register if you're planning to attend. And then if you have any questions, please email that email box. I will put that back up on the screen right here. Here's the link again. You can access this recording, you can access all the other information, and you can reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you in your journey to participating in this meeting. Thanks so much for sticking with us tonight. We had a little bit of technical difficulties to start. I had a couple smoke detector blips, but we covered a lot of ground. And you all asked a very insightful questions. So, I'm feeling very good about our moving forward to November 1st. And again, I cannot wait to meet as many of you that will be there in person as possible.
That's great. Thanks, James. Thanks so much. And you did a great job explaining a very complex and complicated situation, as well as the PFDD itself. So thank you.
Hey, Dan, I want to just say one last thing. I just saw a question pop up that said it's okay to come without your child. And the answer is yes. We also hope as many people as possible will be able to bring their child so that they can, be in the room and present and help speak for themselves.
Sorry, so I just want to clarify then, is it recommended if at all possible that we bring our child, or is it like okay with or without? Because I know that a child can make a very powerful impact, but it also is very disruptive and very tiring and taxing.
Well, I agree. And it's okay with or without. And I think we should say we'll have some areas and some spaces to take breaks. And we can talk a little bit offline as well, Diana. But I would never want someone to not come because you can't bring your child. I think just please don't let that be a barrier, and get in touch with us, and we'll chat a little bit more about the logistics if you would like to bring your child. Okay, thank you, Dan, for letting me interrupt. And
No, that's fine.
I mean, on behalf of IFCR.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone who took the time to dial in. We greatly appreciate it, and I know many more will be listening at their convenience. So this is going to be really helpful, I think, and informative. So thank you to everyone for your effort here.
Thank you all very much. Looking forward to a great event.
This has been great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, James.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.